Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that this session is being recorded. Though this presentation is open to the public, we hope this can be a vehicle to have a larger conversation regarding equity in our built environment. The conversation will be primarily between the invited reviewers and our students, since this presentation is part of the design studio curricula for landscape architecture and architecture programs. So if the audience has any questions, please send them to our emails to kiesa@uta.edu or juwan.im@uta.edu, and we'll put the emails on the chat. So thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Hello, everyone. My name is Juwan Im, an assistant professor of landscape architecture. And this was my colleague, Dennis Kiesa, an assistant professor of architecture. Thank you so much for joining our presentation on Polytechnic Heights Community-Based Master Plan. Let me introduce today's reviewers. We have one of the symposium speakers, Dr. A.K. Sandoval-Strauss, a director of Latino Studies and associate professor of history at Penn State University. He will be giving a lecture this afternoon at 2 p.m. Would you say hello?
Muted. Good morning, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. A pleasure to see everybody.
Thank you for coming. And we have Lizzie McWillie, who is from Building Community Workshop. Would you say hello, Lizzie?
Hi, good to see you all.
And we have Matt Nicollet from Studio Outside Landscape Architecture and Urban Design Firm.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Sivan Steiner from the Preservation and Design team from the city of Fort Worth.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you for coming. And assistant professor of architecture, Chuck McBride.
Good morning.
Good morning. And architecture director, Professor Brett Bell.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for coming. So we hope that Dr. Ellen will come in soon. And thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thanks, Joan. The projects that we will present today are developed as part of Landscape Architecture Design Studio 4, led by Juwan, and Architecture Design Studio 2, which I taught. Our students have worked in collaboration with Community Design Fort Worth since the fall of 2020. We planned this presentation as a pre-event to the CAPPA Open City Symposium, which starts at 12:30 this afternoon. Through this presentation, we hope to continue the conversation regarding equity and diversity in planning and design by looking at Polytechnic Heights in Fort Worth, one of many underinvested neighborhoods in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. In many cases, these communities have a long and rich history that has been overlooked or forgotten by traditional power structures and decision makers. The current growth is bringing attention back to these communities, but unfortunately, usually by opportunistic, profit-driven developers threatening existing community members. Juwan?
Students have been working on creating a community-based master plan to build on the existing legacy, to improve the living conditions, and to promote gradual and controlled evolution of the neighborhood. Beyond working in the design studio, there have been multiple engagements with different community groups, such as William James Middle School, Polytechnic Senior High School, Texas Wesleyan University, and United Fort Worth Justice Center, and members of the community. So these community engagements began last fall and continued through this semester. And we hope that our work can help to bring the members of the community together to create a shared vision. We very much look forward to the conversation today. Then let's begin with the student presentation.
Hi, just give me 1 second to get this open. Hi, I'm Melissa Brown, and my class, which is Studio 4, taught by Dr. M, will be presenting on Poly Heights and our what we learned there and our eventual master plan. And so our class consisted of me, Melissa Brown, Josiah Miller, Safa Khan, and Lauren Wardwell. So Poly Heights is a neighborhood that was annexed into Fort Worth in 1922. And you can see from the map, it's not too far from downtown Fort Worth to the west, to the east. And if you're not from the area, this is where we are in the greater context of DFW. And from this map, you can get a sense of how Poly is situated in relation to nearby parks and highways. There's Tandy Hills to the north of us, which is one of the last remaining prairies which existed before Poly Heights was settled in the 1800s. So it's a really cool area to give you an example of what the land used to look like. And then to the west, Sycamore Park plays a really important part in Poly. And then you can also see there's a railroad track and some important highways around the area. So the design solutions we suggested could be, oh, I'm sorry. So the border you see, it's not a political boundary and it's not a permanent set in stone. It was chosen to act as a case study for the surrounding areas, and it was chosen with input from various institutions that we worked with in the community, as well as the neighborhood groups and industry professionals. So we began by looking at the existing conditions, and these are some of the buildings on Rosedale, Nashville, Vaughn Boulevard, and also some of the existing parks and wooded area in the community. And then we also looked at current vacant lots. Then we analyzed the conditions using GIS, and we looked at the median income. The average income of Polytechnic Heights is $28,108 versus $58,448 as an average for Fort Worth as a whole. The community is 59.2% Hispanic, 23.6% Black, 10.9% white, 3.4% Asian, and 0.6% other. And then you can see in this map how the population of the different ethnicities is evenly spread throughout the neighborhood. And then in the map, the next map, you can see, I'm sorry, the last map. You can see in the southwest corner of the boundary that we looked at, the median income is 24,000 or less versus the rest of the area is 24,000 to 39,000. So Polytechnic Heights has a rich history, and that was really fascinating to learn about. This is where people lived in the early 1800s when Fort Worth was too wild for families to settle. Texas Wesleyan, which is at the heart of the neighborhood, has been key to the formation of the neighborhood. Originally, it was Polytechnic College due to offering more classes than were commonly taught in schools at the time. And it was founded in 1890 and went through several changes and even became a women's college in 1940, before eventually settling on the name Texas Wesleyan. And some of the remaining areas of interest around the neighborhood, some of the other historical buildings include the Poly Theater, which is just to the south of our boundary, and the cemetery, which is just to the east of the college, which was founded in 1891. We made a list of existing businesses to see what were the needs of the community. You can see from this map that most of those are along Vaughn and Rosedale Boulevard. And there are also several community centers, which are labeled in orange in the map. And these offer several important services to the neighborhood, such as affordable childcare and food pantries. There's also numerous churches throughout the site. And Triple B and Black Coffee are two cafes that are popular in the with the locals and also college students and just visitors from the area. The map on the left details the current land uses in yellow, which is predominantly single family, and vacant lots, which are represented by the diagonal lines. The future land use shows an increase in mixed use areas. The next map on the left shows how Polytechnic sits in relation to local hike and bike trails, many of which lead to Tandy Hills to the north or Trinity Park to the west. And on the right, we mapped out the different open spaces within the neighborhood. School grounds are in purple, dark green are undeveloped areas. And the zoning maps for the area show predominant single family with mixed use around the school districts. The blue squares in the next map show the vacant lots and their ownership. These two maps show the slopes and their percentages. The high school sports field those are on some of the highest grounds of the neighborhood and offer a really great view of downtown. And the flood map lets us show which areas, or shows us which areas to be mindful of and which would benefit from storm management techniques. From the soils map, we determined that the most predominant soils were Purvis and Sanger. We were careful to note the location of frac wells and drain holes, which you can see around there's several around the perimeter of the site. Luckily, none of these were within our border, but it was important to realize where they were, especially to note that the one on the southwest corner is especially close to Sycamore Creek, and just to be mindful of that. From our analysis, we considered the environmental and ecological challenges, such as the need to combat pollution from industrial sites and the large number of vacant lots, as well as the opportunities like the large amount of undeveloped green spaces and wooded areas. Some of the social and developmental challenges were poor walkability and limited park amenities, while there is a huge opportunity in the amount of churches and community centers, as well as a feeling of community that we found there. And one of the cultural and recreational challenges the community faces is lack of space for children to play. The rich history of the neighborhood offers a really great opportunity for us and future people to build upon. In addition to the analysis provided by GIS, we met with the community on several occasions to gather feedback. We began with data gathered by Professor Chiasa's class on spatial injustice from this previous year. This was immensely helpful for us to build upon, as well as to continue to build the relationship with the community. We first met at the Community Justice Center and with several members from United Fort Worth. The Justice Center has a food pantry and contains one of the 3 Funky Town fridges, which, if you're not from the area, Funky Town is what some people call Fort Worth. And anyone can stop by here to get food as needed. Behind the buildings, there were several murals emphasizing the diverse makeup of the community. So we could not tour the high school as it is currently being renovated, but that principal met with us and the principal of the William James Middle School, where we were really grateful to get a tour of the beautiful historic building. And it was really great for us to see some of the classwork the students are doing, to talk to the teachers, to see what kind of environment they spend a lot of time in. So Professor M dropped off our preliminary concepts at the schools, as well as Black Coffee, where many community members left comments on the provided sticky notes. These surveys were left with students at the high school and the middle school, as well as accessed online by communities through a shared link. And at Black Coffee, so you can see this is the board that we left and some of the feedback that we got. And then next to that, this is there's a garage sale that was going on, and it was right across the street from Black Coffee. So we stopped over there and we talked to the lady who lived there, as well as her sister and their 2 daughters. And it was really great just to talk to them and get their impressions on Poly Heights. And then you can see just some pictures of us talking to community members and getting a further lecture outside of Black Coffee. And then on the bottom right picture, this was a playground, which was across the street from Poly, and it had some really nice cover on it. And when we were coming back from the garage sale, there was a guy and his toddler who they had just moved there. So it was also another great opportunity to talk to the community members. So we divided the feedback into 4 blocks. We looked at, 9 sections. So we looked at street improvements, community nodes, local businesses, housing, environmental and environment and ecology, trail networks, political and economic, as well as enhanced identity and school community partnerships. And then, so this is the feedback we got that we put into an Excel sheet. This was from the Miro board with an online session we had done with the community members, where they would give us feedback and we would write it down on a virtual Post-it note. And as you can see, most of the feedback is involving streets, the community nodes, which we'll discuss further later, as well as local businesses and what kind of businesses they would be interested in seeing, as well as the political and economic questions and what kind of identity they would see. And of course, the school and the community plays a huge role. And then we took that feedback and created a word cloud. And you can see here just the words that came up the most was community. Walkability was really key. Pedestrian amenities, again, people wanted to be able to walk around. Local is huge, and food and healthy food came up often. There's a lot of small convenience stores throughout the neighborhood, but not a quick place where you could go in and buy fresh fruit and vegetables. So after that, we took the surveys that we had gotten and we created a matrix with those. And then again, you can see the street improvements, what kind of businesses came in, and then the nodes were the most popular there. So we took that again and created a word cloud just to make it a little bit easier to see what they were interested in. And again, community was huge. Pop-up events that we suggested, as well as green spaces, gardens, virtual Wi-Fi stations. And then we had the feedback from Black Coffee from our boards that had been left there, and you can see community nodes and the businesses got the most feedback on that section. So we took that, made a word cloud again, and you can see community was again really popular, which is great to see that they have there's a strong sense of community and an interest to keep that going. And then just parks were also popular. So then the sheets that went to the high school were a little bit more free form. There was a space on the back to say if you had been voted mayor or if you were elected mayor, what would you like to do? And it was really cool to read what some of the students said. Some of them just said they would help people out. One of the students drew a picture of some students like with a cleaning up, and they said they would help clean up the neighborhood and help people out, and that was really cool. Nothing was like, if I was the mayor, I'd have a huge mansion. I would help the community. So it was really nice to be able to read that. And you can see from this feedback they were interested in improvements to their school, parks, access to the opportunity to create art, to rain gardens, and the ability to have safe biking and sports fields. So that was really nice. And then we also had some feedback from the middle school, and they just gave us like a paragraph. So it's just a blank sheet. The other students filled out the survey and put X's on what they liked. And so these students just wrote a paragraph, which was again really cool to read. And also people said they would want to help people out and have that community or somewhere to hang out with their friends. And as you can see, friends was the most important thing for them, as well as just places to play sports. So And it was really helpful for us. We were just grateful for the opportunity to see that feedback.
Hello, I'm Lauren Wardwell. So at this point, before we move on to discuss the community's master plan, we'd like to pause and ask if y'all have any questions. If there's anything you'd like us to explain in more detail or something you'd like us to go over again, please let us know. We can go back to previous slides, or if there is just something that you are kind of unclear on.
I had one question. Is it okay for me to ask a question this time? Just
Yes,
maybe-
go ahead.
You mentioned the, if I'm not mistaken, poor walkability. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because it's sort of an old enough neighborhood that I would have expected it to be kind of built less around automobiles than much of the Metroplex. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so the sidewalks, well, it's kind of a question of physical safety, like space that's available, as well as actual, psychological or other safety. So for one thing, the roads are very cracked and bumpy. The sidewalks are very narrow. Something we've noticed looking at sidewalks, they were very narrow, and it's not great for a pandemic if you're trying to socialize yourself from anybody. But a lot of spaces, like especially along Vaughn, there's no buffer between you and the road. So it's a very narrow sidewalk where a lot of times there's a lot of cars parked along the businesses, and then there's the road. So it's very small, and Vaughn is a busy road. So it's, it's not too safe there. At the garage sale we went to, the ladies actually said they go up to walk around the Texas Wesleyan because that's where they feel safer. So that's another thing. It's safety from there is a police station in the area, but, I think the presence could be greater. So, maybe like lighting is not as good there. Maybe the neighborhood is not somewhere they'd like to walk at all times, especially being a very family-centered neighborhood. It's not somewhere, if there's lots of cracks. We noticed that, if you had a wheelchair, there's not always access. There's a lot of bumps. It wouldn't be the best place if you were going around with, say, stroller or your grandparent in a wheelchair or something. So it's safety along those lines. So it's the roads are just really small, narrow, and then again, it's Texas. It is hot, and there's not a lot of trees along the road. So if you're walking on there, you're getting the heat off of the sidewalk, from the asphalt, and then from all of the buildings.
Thank you.
I also want to add, Josiah and I walked on the sidewalk along Vaughn, and there was a lot of broken glass. So that was just something like, there was weeds growing through the cracks of the sidewalk. They were also just like not level, and they were sometimes littered with different trash. So yeah, that also informed our assessment that the sidewalks were not very safe.
Let's keep going.
Okay. Thank you for that question. So I'll start this next portion off the presentation by discussing our conceptual design that was developed with the community. After processing through all of the site analysis information and community feedback, we began putting pen to paper and sketching out ideas for different design solutions. Using map overlays, we began to find opportunities within the neighborhood to address the many needs brought up by the community. We decided to break the plan down into 4 parts. First, we began looking at environmental and street improvements. Utilizing existing bike networks throughout the rest of the city of Fort Worth, a series of street improvements are proposed, such as wider sidewalks, safe bike lanes, rain gardens, traffic calming, and more lighting. A walking trail is also explored at this point to encourage physical activity to improve health. The final trail route that is proposed in the master plan is different than what we came up with here, but we began looking at trail length and how the trail might connect the community further. Low impact development is also proposed here to mitigate stormwater and reduce flooding in areas that have issues with flooding. The next section that we looked at is history and identity. So this addresses the comments which called for an increased education of Poly's history and also capitalizes on the pride that the neighborhood has. So historically significant buildings with interesting architectural elements are mapped out and numbered here. And we also looked at the primary entrances into the community and saw an opportunity to enhance the identity of the community through using signage and wayfinding and establishing a sense of place. This sketch we actually did virtually. And so we looked at utilizing the vacant lands to address the needs of the community. We looked at land ownership with preference to land owned by the city of Fort Worth. And we saw this as an opportunity to increase spaces for children to play, for exercising, for growing food and ornamental gardens, and to create market spaces. These spaces were chosen strategically to be dispersed throughout the entire community along the main routes, which we designated in the street improvements section. And then in this last section, we looked at businesses and housing. So one of the main comments that we got from the community was that they wanted more local businesses. So again, we looked at the vacant lands and buildings for opportunities to increase housing density and create a local economy. Utilizing the proposed street network improvements, commercial centers are proposed along the major roads of Rosedale, Vickery, and Vaughan, with secondary routes being prioritized for higher density housing such as apartments and townhomes. We even began exploring where individual business types could be located based on proximity to adjacent services and the conditions of each individual site. And I just want to add that we also, we did all of that keeping in mind that we wanted to keep a focus on a local economy, so local entrepreneurs where the dollar would stay within Poly. Okay, so moving on. We began to develop a more concrete conceptual plan framed by a clear vision statement and concise objectives. This master plan vision will invigorate the community of Polytechnic Heights with a greater sense of pride by recognizing and refining the inherent value within the land this neighborhood was built upon. Polytechnic Heights was important in the development of Fort Worth and continues to have a lot to offer. The community is full of wonderful, passionate, hardworking people who are its greatest asset. Through sustainable and equitable development, the distinctive character of the neighborhood will be capitalized on to create a lasting network of shared spaces, utilizing local businesses, institutions, and existing vacant lands. We intend to highlight the rich history and the diverse cultures that make up the community. And the concept was broken down into 3 categories. The first, cultural and recreational, and the goal for that is to enhance community identity and strengthen access to neutral, accessible open spaces. And the objectives to achieve that are to promote historical education, to create connection through hike and bike trails, to develop a framework for art programs, and to promote cultural events. The second category, environmental and ecological, and the goal for that is to improve environmental quality, sustainability, and public health psychology of the community. And the objectives to achieve that goal are a decentralized green infrastructure system, integrating native plants throughout the neighborhood, and increasing access to green open space. And lastly, for social and development, the goal is to develop and expand amenities to make the neighborhood safer and more accessible for all. And the objectives to achieve that are to enhance the local economy, to improve walkability, and to strengthen the network between local institutions. At this point, we began looking at precedent studies and proposing individual programs which might achieve those goals. So for the proposed street improvement programs, bike lanes, green infrastructure outside of storefronts, which would help mitigate stormwater and flooding, enhanced plantings in roadway mediums to help achieve more of an identity and also create a greater sense of safety. These emergency call boxes, bus shelters with more shade and privacy, and street trees. For the identity and history programs, we looked at how different artists might display their art. We looked at the history of Polytechnic and specifically looking at the cemetery. We looked at murals or outdoor temporary art installations, and just the different types of art that would connect with the community. For the community nodes, we looked at a lot of different programs which might help to meet the needs of the community. So community gardens, different places to play for both children and adults, temporary and permanent markets, and also access to educational resources, so pop-up libraries with Wi-Fi. For the different housing densities, we explored low, medium, and high density housing and how that might look in the neighborhood. So single family residential is of course the most common, and that's what is mainly in Poly right now. But we also looked at medium density, so having some kind of townhomes, and high density or condos of some kind. And then the programs we proposed for addressing commercial development included this kind of walkable area with a lot of different shops, a lot of outdoor commerce activity, and just creating pedestrian experiences which will bring people into different businesses. And this is, like I said before, all keeping in mind that we'd like to focus on building a local economy where the money stays in Poly.
So with this information, we created a master plan, and we used the community feedback with the face-to-face conversations, the virtual engagement and the Miro board, feedback from the school, local engagement, surveys, justice center visits, and visits to the schools, as well as expert feedback such as a planner, architect, urban designer, and landscape architect who gave us some feedback, and then GIS, the Global Information Systems data, which from that we got green space access, historic changes, demographics, land use zoning, flood zones, satellite views, existing trail networks, vacant land ownership, and existing businesses. And then we took that and we looked at street improvements, community nodes, enhanced identity, and local business housing. So we first looked at street improvements, particularly on Vickery, Nashville, Avenue D, which the architecture class had the idea, which the school loved, to call destination education. So that's going to be a prominent road you'll see more about later, as well as Rosedale, Avenue J, Beach, Mackenzie, Vaughan, Bishop, and Ayers. We created a primary and secondary walking trail that connects to the nodes and the other important locations in the community. We then identified areas of historic interest and cultural identity and labeled areas to focus on to create a feeling of entrance into the community. Using the vacant lands, we created a series of nodes to meet the needs of the community that are currently lacking. And we decided on what needs there were by kind of partially us looking at the site, and then also a lot of it was based on feedback that we gotten. So these nodes will create spaces to gather and foster community activity. And the yellow spaces throughout this map are residential infill, and the red ones are commercial infill. Most of these buildings are currently vacant. And the complete master plan gives a better idea how the walking trail connects to the aforementioned nodes and unifies the networks by creating a circulation path, which allows users to move from residential areas to recreation to local business areas. So this plan could be implemented in 3 phases. In the first phase, which would take 5 years, we recommend improvements along Avenue D, Avenue J, Vaughan, and to begin work on Rosedale. The community activity nodes would begin in this phase. The chosen nodes are either gardens or pop-up activity areas, which could be created within a year. The second phase, to be completed in 10 years, would continue the improvements on Rosedale, as well as Ayers, Mackenzie, Bishop, Collard, Beach, and Nashville. In this phase, the entrance enhancements would begin, as well as some of the larger nodes, such as the pop-up library and new parks. In the final phase, to be completed within 20 years, the improvements along Rosedale would be finished, along with storefront enhancement, road changes, and the rest of the nodes. From this walkability map, you can see most areas are accessible within a half mile to 1 mile radius, and many areas are less than that. We looked at several streets to illustrate what changes would be made. Nashville, Rosedale, Vaughn, and Avenue K were chosen to show the suggested changes. And from these red lines, you can see where we made those, where we focused on. So at the intersection of Nashville and Destination Education, we suggested narrowing the lanes, widening the sidewalks, adding a two-way bike lane, which that runs in the north of Nashville there, just below the police station, and adding greater green areas with trees to help cool the area and add a welcoming site. And then at the corner of the police station, the landscaping had died out, so we proposed adding some benches and just kind of a safe place for kids to sit. The police station in this intersection is directly down the street from the high school, so I imagine that a lot of times high school students are going to come and pick up their younger siblings and then go off somewhere else. And then off this corner on the lower right, that's where the pop-up library would be. And in the blue lines, you could see how the water would drain off into low impact design measures, such as rain gardens. And then this view, which cuts a section from, as you can see in the red line here, it cuts through the school down south to through Avenue D into the neighborhood. And it's a really diverse area. And you can see we've just increased the amount of trees, widened the sidewalks. It's an 8-foot sidewalk now where it was previously about 4 feet. And just these wider sidewalks and the additions of trees are really going to help encourage people to get out and walk. It should feel safer. You'll have that barrier between you and the cars. And another one of the comments people made where they just wanted Poly to kind of look a little bit better to give a greater sense of pride to the community. They already have that pride, but to help increase that. And then on Avenue K, the site, which you can see down on the left side of the road, a little lower, that's one of the vacant lands that we propose a universal access park. So somewhere where, some of the other nodes we propose, like a pop-up skate park or sports. So this is somewhere that kind of people of all ages could go, run around, hang out, enjoy the plants. And then you can see from this section that we've widened the sidewalks to 8 feet, added some rain gardens to help direct the stormwater off of the road and to help clean that before it reaches the Sycamore Creek and then later the Trinity. And then increase lights and just the plants along there. And then there's some bump outs along the road. Previously, this road was about 29 feet long and there was no designated parking. So adding these bump outs and narrowing the lane will help to calm traffic, especially as they go down and you see that bump out, it's just going to cause you to slow down a little bit. And then at the intersection of Nashville, I'm sorry, I'm out of order. On Rosedale, several changes were proposed to help slow traffic, which would, slowing traffic would improve walkability, and it would also cause drivers who are passing through to notice the local shops and encourage them to stop. So this lane was narrowed from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, where we've got a median now in the center, which is going to help people cross the road. It's also just going to cool it, and it's going to create more of a feeling of an actual neighborhood. And this kind of is similar to the feeling further down on Rosedale and Magnolia, which several residents mentioned in their feedback that they wanted to emulate that feeling of a walkable townscape. So here there's a bike path on both sides of the road, and the bike path is separated from the traffic with a green barrier that's planted, and it's also separated from the sidewalk, and that helps to create a safer experience for pedestrians, so they don't have to worry about cyclists jumping onto the sidewalk. So it helps improve the experience for everyone, and it's then you'll be more likely to use it. And then down here on the lower right, lower left hand of the picture, that's a kind of a mostly cemented vacant lot, and we proposed a food truck parking area there with lots of amenities. And this was also based off of some feedback that we'd gotten, that there are food trucks in the area, but people just kind of line up and sit in their cars to get to them. They don't really have a space to gather. So this would give them that space. And then on Vaughn Boulevard, which is another real major road in Poly, it you can see from this little key map on the side, it intersects Poly, and then it leads you to the college. And you know, before, this was an important road before it became a car-centric neighborhood, and it continues to be one. It's really fast. It is just 2 lanes right now. It's very wide, and it's very, people go down that road really fast, and this road goes through neighborhoods. So narrowing the road down to 20 feet would help to slow traffic, as well as taking some of that area that was previously the road and creating a green barrier with trees. It's also going to help slow down the traffic, and it will also cool the urban heat island and create a cooler environment for people to walk along. And then on this corner up in the picture, that's another current vacant lot, and we propose putting a butterfly garden there, which it's at the corner of Avenue I and Vaughn. So it's a nicer spot when you're going into your neighborhood. It creates, again, just a sense of place and somewhere you might like to hang out. And then we created a list of native and adaptive plants so that the community could use to replace dying and invasive plants that are in the area. And the ones we chose would be able to handle all our Texas weather, such as snows or heat or drought. Thank you.
Hello, this is Lauren again. So I will be talking about the community nodes. And the community nodes take advantage of vacant lands, like Melissa was talking about, and they fill the needs that are featured prominently from the feedback that we were given by the community. So looking at the master plan, you can see that the nodes, which are these kind of pink areas, they're dispersed throughout the community so that a user does not have to walk far from one to reach another. And the nodes were designed with 6 categories in mind: gardens, events, education, green space, commerce, and activity for both children and adults. At this point, the different typologies were used to explore how the categories might look on a standard size vacant lot. So education might look like a pop-up library. Events would be a large stage with a big open green space. Commerce could happen on a paved lot with pop-up tents. Art could be a more permanent structure. Activity could be a pop-up play area, and gardens could also be set up on a paved lot next to buildings. So the selected vacant lots were broken down into these 6 categories and were spaced throughout the neighborhood so that no matter where one lived, they could access different types of nodes. Here you can see a more fully rendered version of the community nodes throughout the neighborhood. And I'll go into detail about each of them. So in order to define the spaces further, the neighborhood was broken down into 3 zones. In the northwestern corner, because of the presence of Texas Wesleyan University, William James Middle School, and Poly High School, and building off of the idea of a destination education proposed by Dennis's architecture students, this area was deemed the education zone. Here, a pop-up library with a Wi-Fi center is the central node. There would also be a large-scale food production garden, 2 permanent outdoor markets, a pollinator garden, a food truck park down on the south, which Melissa talked briefly about, a new public park, and then actually another larger new public park up on the north side. In the eastern half of the neighborhood, we chose the theme of a creative zone, inspired by the gardens and the commercial district in the northeast corner. Here, the community garden is the central node. In addition to that, An amphitheater is proposed up to the north, which is a good location because if a concert was happening or a show was happening late into the evening, it wouldn't disturb a lot of residents. And it's also just next to an existing event center, so it could be tied into that. Also, another public park is proposed along Rosedale. 2 lots just south of Rosedale are proposed as a walk through history. So having kind of a tour through the history of Poly. A butterfly garden is proposed along Vaughan. An education garden is proposed just across the street from D. McCrae Elementary School. So teachers and students could use that as a way to learn about growing their own food. 2 universal design parks are proposed where it's accessible for people of all ages, and elderly people can go and hang out and watch children play in a playground. And lastly, an outdoor kitchen is proposed so people can come together and share recipes and food and just establish a further sense of community. And lastly, in the southwestern corner, because of the presence of Titus Paulsell Park and Sycamore Park just outside the boundary to the west, this zone became the activity zone. Here, the exercise field is the central node. The exercise field would have a running track and outdoor exercise equipment. One big comment that we got back was that people would like to see a gym. And so we thought this was a way to make a gym that is more accessible to people and doesn't require membership or monthly fees, but could be used by all. To the north, there's a pop-up market that would be kind of temporary with just tents that could be opened up on the weekends, and then during the week it could be a parking lot. An oversized game park, looking at proposing a skate park and a basketball court, a children's playground, 2 more universal design parks, having public art displayed where it could kind of rotate out through different local artists. And lastly, through the park on the south, a public walking trail would be proposed to go through the woods so people could enjoy walking through nature and also get some physical activity. And then this is just an example of how a community garden could look on one of the vacant lands. So this is a before image, and then after. You can see children learning and playing in the garden, and there doesn't have to be a lot of development. It doesn't have to be expensive, and it can still create a lot of opportunity for people to learn and to connect. And then this is a proposal of what the hiking trail could look like. So the walk through nature, it's just behind the Justice Center. And it's currently just a wooded area that's not used. And so this could be the beginning of a trail to walk through the woods.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Safa, and I'll be presenting the identity improvement for the community. We wanted to improve the community's identity, such as enhanced entrance features that let you enter or leave the community. We also want to educate people about the community's history by enhancing the buildings and objects of historic significance. This is the master plan, showing us the places marked for modern and historic identity. Modern identity is the places of interest where people would mostly go to Poly for today. You can also see the enhanced entrances. We marked the primary entrances of each street. And then the next slide. These buildings are of historic significance to the community, such as the Polytechnic Cemetery is considered to the 1000th historic Texas cemetery. And then the Polytechnic Methodist Church was completed in 1952, and it shared its congregation with the Texas Wesleyan campus for 120 years. And next is the historic identity trail map, taking people to the historic places in Poly. These historic places will also have signages that should help people understand their historic significance and will provide a good cultural and educational experience. And the next one is we wanted to show people the current identities that define the Poly community. For example, the Community Justice Center is a great place to host community events and connect with your neighborhoods. Then there is the Black Coffee, which is upping the scene of artisan coffee roast in Poly. And there were various comments that we got from the feedback from the community. Some of the comments are like, people don't even live there, but they just come to Poly to visit Black Coffee. And also how it is so convenient for the students from Texas Wesleyan, as it is right across. And next is the modern identity trail map. These maps provide trailhead identification, and it also shows the people, the places that identify and reflect the nature of the Poly community. These places reflect the pride of the community. The trails marked are followed by the walking trail we came up with for the community improvements. And next is it's a visual of how the historic signages will be put up outside the historic buildings and give people a few information about when it was constructed and why it's of such significance. And I marked as the gold star on the signages will be put up for the historic buildings. And next is a representation of how the trail maps will be put up on various spots on the streets to kind of help people guide people where the identities are. And next is a smaller street signage. These are for smaller streets, just to mark the street. And next is the entrance features that will be put up for the main streets of the community. And yeah.
Okay, good morning. My name is Josiah Miller, and I will continue the final portion of our presentation, which concerns several business and housing proposals we formulated as a means of stabilization and community improvement for Polytechnic Heights. Here again is our community-based master plan proposal. The commercial infill is shaded red, and the residential infill is a pale yellow. In the process of formulating these proposals, we went through a series of GIS and modeling analyses of the neighborhood to come to a greater understanding of the issues at stake and to decide on realistic methods to improve the neighborhood and the quality of life of residents who occupy it. This includes the previously discussed mappings of property vacancies and future land uses per the City of Fort Worth's Comprehensive Plan of 2020. As previously discussed, we're dividing the infill improvements into 3 phases. In order to introduce the process of improvement gradually and selectively, the first phase we envisioned centered around commercial properties principally located along East Rosedale Street, as well as Vaughn Boulevard. We felt that these 2 axes were centers of activity and the revitalization of the community would necessitate the implementation of businesses, preferably owned by people from Poly. Residential infill is focused south of Rosedale and centers around the east-west axis of Avenue J, with the urban residential complex located on the western periphery forming an anchor. Some single-lot residential properties are also developed north of Rosedale. It is important to note that some of the proposed commercial development is located on properties that currently have buildings that are unused. We tried to look outside of vacant properties to include neglected commercial store frontage. For phase 2, we continued the process of infilling commercial and residential properties and have added a secondary commercial access along East Vickery Boulevard, located in the northern portion of Poly. This phase also includes several larger multifamily dwellings located closer to Texas Wesleyan, in addition to additional development located throughout the study area. Much of the area located north of Rosedale is currently zoned as mixed use, so ideally the Euclidean delineation between residential and commercial uses could be blended in selected areas. The third phase essentially concludes the development on the infill lots and includes several townhomes or higher density multifamily dwellings on larger lots that can accommodate such structures. This phase also focuses on the remaining single lot residential properties located throughout Poly, especially in the area located north of Vickery that is adjacent to the light industrial park located in the northwestern periphery of the study area. Included with our proposals for development were a variety of uses, including multiple densities of housing, mixed-use spaces, and a variety of businesses that reflected the needs of the community that we heard through the feedback we received. Unfortunately, any proposal for improving a neighborhood these days comes with a tacit cost, that of the social problem of gentrification. It is critical that any proposal for the improvement of housing stock and commercial opportunities in a neighborhood take consideration of measures to protect the character of a district so that the current residents who occupy it can continue to do so in the future. Few measures exist outside of zoning laws to protect residents of an area from predatory development. As land is currently viewed as a financial instrument in this nation, the possibility of cheap land becoming valuable someday in the future is sufficient financial incentive to displace large numbers of disadvantaged people, forcing them in a constant exodus to find more affordable places to live. In light of this, we decided that it would be apt to propose that the citizens of Poly form a community land trust. A community land trust is a model of affordable housing and community development that centers around a nonprofit corporation that holds land on behalf of a community while serving as the long-term steward for affordable housing, community gardens, civic buildings, commercial spaces, and other communal assets. The CLT acquires land and maintains ownership of it permanently while entering into long-term renewable leases with new users instead of traditional sales. When the user sells, the home is sold at a price set by the CLT. Additionally, they earn a percentage of the increased property value, while the remainder is kept by the trust, thus ensuring future affordability of the community. We also felt that it would be important to propose business models that would allow for the commercial development to be centered around the citizens of Poly. Cooperatives, which are collectively owned and managed democratically, allow for the empowerment of the people who work with them as well as their customers. Several types of cooperatives exist, including worker cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, producer cooperatives, and purchasing cooperatives. Additionally, they provide goods and services to areas that have been shunned by traditional businesses for lack of profitability and return more wealth to the areas that they serve. Form-based codes are a means of preserving community identity by moving the focus of zoning from uses to typology of landscape and built form. Form-based codes also loosen traditional restrictions on use found in Euclidean zoning and allow for a plurality of uses to be found in a district as long as the idioms of landscape and architecture are maintained. Form-based codes ensure that new development will maintain the character of the area of the overlay. Accessory dwelling units are a secondary house or apartment that shares the building lot of larger primary residence. The establishment and use of an ADU depends on zoning rules and regulations. An ADU overlay district would present the opportunity for homeowners to construct a secondary dwelling on their property to use as a rental unit for supplemental income. This concludes our portion of the presentation. Continuing with housing proposals, our architecture graduate students of Professor Chies's studio. We thank you for your attention, and if there are any comments at this time, we'd appreciate it.
So this is going to be a short pause for just any questions, and we're going to proceed to show some urban interventions and some analysis by the architecture students. So if there are any quick questions, the students can answer those now, and then we'll proceed. Okay. Okay, Andrew, you're muted, but go.
The parcel opposite the middle school, which you have labeled as a community node, are there any limitations on the use of that for public space? That's a really key spot that you've identified. I have an idea for what we can get to later, but I just want to make sure the disposition of it was clear.
Could we, I believe that land is owned by the city of Fort Worth, which makes it the most opportune because, you know, there's less issues of ownership, and the city of Fort Worth would be more likely to cooperate. So not that I know of.
I think actually, and maybe some of my students can check on this, but I think it's owned by Texas Wesleyan. Is that correct?
Okay.
Can somebody verify that?
According to what I have, it's owned by Texas Wesleyan. But as of right now, it's empty. Nothing's happening with it. They're just letting it sit there. It's just an open field.
Yeah, and Catherine, I think, is going to speak a little bit about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So as we move forward,
This is Suzanne. I have one question. In looking at the cross sections for the road diets, did you guys also look at the city's master thoroughfare plan to see what it called for in those cross sections that it recommends?
Students.
Melissa? Melissa, you're on mute.
I think she's having trouble unmuting for some reason.
So maybe we can touch on that at the end. Savan, they've looked at some of that, and they've also looked at the urban village, which this is one of for the city of Fort Worth as well. So on the architecture students are second semester design students, and their projects are much smaller, but they were started looking at it as a way of understanding the neighborhood. So there was some analysis, and a couple of the projects that you'll see are left open-ended. And our final project for the studio is to design prototype infill housing, and so we'll see some of these as sort of beginning stages for that lay out the groundwork for the rest of the semester. And then there are also small urban architectural interventions that we call, and we'll see a couple of those as well. So with that, Becca and Teresa.
My name is Becca Ecosipan-Tarjos. I'm a second-year Path A grad student in architecture, and I'll kick off our presentations with some analysis we did of Poly Heights housing. Teresa Devilmar and I took on the task of analyzing the housing types in the area, zoning, and adjacencies, to see where and how we could propose higher density housing options. As DSW continues to grow and take in new residents, we're looking at opportunities in this neighborhood to bring in those residents and revitalize the neighborhood. So this is a quick overview of some research that we did. I've been identifying vacant lots. We're showing those as green rectangles on the left image. And looking at this, you can see most of the vacant lots are within the white areas, which are single family housing. These lots are pretty evenly spaced out throughout the neighborhood and didn't leave us with an obvious path forward for infill housing. So then we started to look at multi-use zones, which are in blue, higher density zones, which are some of the browns. So Teresa is going to talk about the multi-use zones on the north side of the neighborhood, and then I'm going to talk about the high density and medium density zones that are here in the middle of the neighborhood. So looking at this, we have multifamily, high density multifamily and medium density here with the multi-use zone next to it. And this is along Rosedale that we've been talking about this morning. Oops. Sorry, I don't know why it's lagging. Okay, well, I had pictures of the neighborhood, and there they are. Okay, here's some quick snapshots of the types of houses in the area. You can see there's quite a variety in style. The top left shows a fenced yard, which we found to be pretty common in the neighborhood, or fenced front yards were very common, and their neighbor has a garage apartment in the back. Below that, we're showing a row of what initially looks like single family housing, but they've actually been fitted to be duplexes. And this is a large majority of the homes in this area are actually duplexes. And then the two pictures on the right show larger houses that appeared to have about 5 or 6 units in them. And a usable front porch was a common element of all sizes of homes. So initially we took the step of proposing or analyzing infill housing in what are already existing vacant lots, and infilling with the same type of housing that's already there. So duplexes and these larger homes that have about 6 units. And so using this method of infill, I came up with an added 24 units for this area. And then we looked at adding in higher density housing and took the same approach at the beginning. The top image shows just adding in high density apartments only on the vacant lots. We get about 115 units with that. And then below that is looking at just infilling part of each block, not completely taking over. And then the last one would be if we were to put high density all along this area, which we're not proposing, but we wanted to kind of see what that top number would be. And that comes out to about 1,000 units. And the last type of housing we looked at was infilling with townhomes. And so the same thing, the top drawing shows existing vacant lots, which can house about 2 homes on each current vacant lot. Below that is using a little bit of each block, and then below that is using all of the blocks, which will get us about 220 units. So after analyzing the options for more dense housing, I started looking at a way to bridge this area of the neighborhood where residential ends and commercial and community spaces begin. So looking at, there's actually an alley between Avenue G, where we were just showing that infill housing, and Rosedale, and it's not a vehicle alley. So it really lends itself to becoming a pedestrian pass through or a walking trail. And the alley is only a half block off of the neighborhood hiking trail that the landscape students are proposing. So it would mesh well with other improvements that are happening in the neighborhood. So this is looking a little bit closer at that corridor. We've got obviously residential here, all on the south side. And then as you cross over this alley, it becomes, there's about 5 churches here just in these couple of blocks, several commercial institutions. There's a Boys and Girls Club down here on the east side. And then the university, 2 public schools, and Sycamore Park are right here. So this is a heavily used area by the entire community. So a safe walking trail would be highly utilized in this area. It's the seam between residential and the commercial and community things we just mentioned. And it would address a few issues the neighborhood is facing. It'll provide a safe walkway for neighborhood kids to and from school, or just to each other's houses or to the park. It would also provide a wide, well-paved and lit path for wheelchair access, which was mentioned by several residents as an issue in the neighborhood. And it would provide an inviting space near the commercial buildings on Rosedale. And so to accomplish these safety features, we would add lighting along this entire trail, add benches and seating, and landscaping, trees for shade. And finally, it would add about 64 townhomes where currently there's 36 units on just these 3 blocks. And this is Teresa.
Thank you, Becca. Hi, my name is Teresa. I'm also a second semester architecture grad student. My study is different. You can go to the next slide, Becca. Thank you. My study is different than Becca's. Mine's focus more on the low density infill housing on 2 blocks presenting different conditions. One of them is a vacant 5-acre lot, mostly owned by Texas Wesleyan University, and the other one is a block with existing single-family homes. In this study, both are developed just enough to show what these vacant lots would look like if infilled. On the right is a site plan showing in white the number of existing buildings, and in green the number of possible infill single family and duplexes in those vacant lots. You can go to the next slide. The larger vacant lot presents an opportunity for full development of triplexes while preserving some of its greenscape by adding a public park with sitting areas, a green pedestrian and bike alley, and front yards in front of each unit. Parking to these triplexes are outside of the alley, north or south of buildings, as a mean to keep the realm of car and pedestrian separate. Next slide. To keep this block consistent and avoid filling up displacement, the vacant lots will be infilled with 1,200 square feet single family homes on lots that are 5,000 square feet or less, and duplexes on lots that are 7,500 square feet. Overall, adding infill housing to the neighborhood will bring up the property value, enhance its reputation, and attract more university students to the area. Thank you.
Hector and Lindsay, I think you're next. If you're saying something, you're muted, or we can't hear you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Hubble, and together with my partner, Hector Guevara, our project is East Rosedale, a community-based urban revival initiative. So I apologize. Our study began with the current economic conditions along the main commercial corridor in the Polytechnic Heights neighborhood, which is Rosedale. Our goal is an architectural intervention that supports a local, healthy, and sustainable commercial space that reflects the vibrancy of the community and that Polytechnic Heights residents enjoy. There are three main centers of commerce on Rosedale. Rosedale stretches the entire length of Polytechnic Heights for a total of 4.3 miles. There are roughly 75 businesses along Rosedale. There are also many empty and abandoned storefronts that give a false impression that businesses are not surviving and thriving in Polytechnic Heights. There are three main centers of commerce that are the Western Roundabout, the historic Main Street area on Rosedale that's in front of Texas Wesleyan University, and the Eastern Roundabout. The distance from the Western Roundabout to the Eastern Roundabout is roughly 1.3 miles. As you can see from this axonometric, that as far as size, the commercial centers get successively bigger. And the difference in size between the three centers could also be a metaphor for comparing their relative size and service and significance to the community. The Western Roundabout has 6 or 7 businesses over a 3-block radius, with the majority of those businesses being auto repair with a bank and a convenience store and a hair salon. The space is the least walkable of the three centers. While the north frontage is dominated by the park, the lack of safe crossing space makes moving through the space difficult. The second center, which is in front of Texas Wesleyan, was historically the main street of this neighborhood. The space is larger and it has a few restaurants, a coffee shop, and a yoga studio. While the community of Polytechnic Heights does use these restaurants and these spaces, they are primarily focused on serving the students and the university. Texas Wesleyan dominates the front of the north frontage, and it owns also most of the south frontage along this area. And while our initial studies thought that this would be a perfect area for an architectural intervention. Currently, the space is not very community focused. So the third and largest center is the Eastern Roundabout. From our research and reading about vibrant cities and walkable cities, we learned that a cluster of 25 or more businesses within 100 by 100 meter walkable space is essential for vibrant streets and vibrant communities. However, in Fort Worth, only about 6% of the population lives within that specific parameter. The reason why I'm mentioning that is in this third center, we already have that. So the Eastern Roundabout already has 28 local businesses in that same footprint. Many of them are locally owned, and many of them also cater and reflect the community in that they primarily cater to the Hispanic population in the neighborhood. However, there is such potential in this area because of the business cluster that's already here. There are some issues within the neighborhood. As you can see from the pictures, there's a lot of concrete, and again, there are some broken down and abandoned storefronts that again give the appearance that this area is not thriving when that's not the case. So our conclusion was to focus on this area. The roundabout, one of the other challenges is that it's a hotspot for the heat island effect. The roundabout is busy and it's unsafe. There are no clearly marked crossing spots. And except for immediately on Rosedale Street, there are poor and sometimes no sidewalks. Our vision, based on the feedback given from the community about their desire for access to green spaces, walkability, and access to fresh food, was to bring those aspects into this space. The Eastern Roundabout is surrounded by neighborhoods. Our plan is to bring in existing businesses that are sometimes just a few blocks down the street into a cohesive district so that the businesses could also benefit from the foot traffic of each other.
So the site is surrounded by single-family neighborhoods at an important intersection that connects and serves as a gateway to Polytechnic Heights. The project aims to reclaim this underutilized public space that's been analyzed as the most feasible ground for site-specific intervention. Our plan additionally is to bring in existing businesses from across Poly Heights that are scattered to infill the vacant lots that currently exist, creating a more cohesive business and economic hub that benefits from a higher visibility and improved pedestrian-friendly district. So some of our improvements include focusing on slowing down traffic by reducing autofocus lanes to 2, and instead using side street parking and increasing the lanes of sidewalks and bike lanes to create a more safe and walkable district. This will in turn attract people to visit and stay, and the increased green space will serve to reduce the urban heat island effect. So by transforming this heavy traffic-focused site, our project will foster an improved pedestrian-friendly life and commercial corridor for Poly Heights. Underlying the project of the proposed landscape and urban improvements, our project proposal is an installation that is a field of canopies that create a dynamic and diverse economic core that also serve as a gateway and icon to Poly Heights. So various canopy typologies work together and have been populated across the site based on multiple activities that will occur underneath each block of our site. And each canopy cluster is unique in defining its own identity and microclimate. The result is an urban scale connective canopy that hovers above the site Each typology also works tangibly to improve the site, either by providing shading and seating, landscaping, regreening, or water collection, as well as solar power generation. The structural interventions create an urban scene that sets the stage for a series of unique and diverse activities to take place. It ultimately serves also to showcase the community's vibrant culture in a modular way, so that they can define and change it as they see fit. And finally, the proposed urban intervention will enhance the gateway to Poly Heights while establishing a much needed cultural and economic anchor in the community. And this is the conclusion of our project. Thank you very much.
Now we'll go to the other side of Rosedale. Elena.
Hello, my name is Elena Gunter, and I was part of the team that was looking specifically at education in Poly Heights. So during our research, we became interested in how students get to school in Poly Heights. We mapped out where the schools were and what their attendance zones were and how long it would take students to get to school from the farthest point via bike, walking, or driving. We realized that Polytechnic High School has an attendance zone that stretches all the way from I-35 in the west to beyond Oakland Street in the east. When mapping out how students coming in from the west get to Polytechnic High, it's obvious that almost every student coming in from the west passes through the intersection of Beach and Rosedale, which is right behind the high school. So it's marked out on this yellow circle on the map here. We decided to focus on that section of Beach where it intersects with Rosedale as a major entrance to the neighborhood. Our goal is to make a monumental entrance that will help create a sense of neighborhood identity that the landscape architecture students mentioned earlier. We wanted to address public safety on Beach also and create a safer way for students to cross over to Sycamore Park across the street. My specific part of the proposal ties in with the historic trail that was also proposed in the master plan by the landscape architecture students that was just presented. It is a structure that will serve as both a monument to mark a major neighborhood entrance and as a trailhead for the historic trail where it begins at Polytechnic High School. The structure is a type of boardwalk that would run alongside Beach Street, growing out of the sloping terrain. On the southern end, closest to Rosedale, you can walk straight onto the structure. And as you continue along, the structure stays level as the ground slopes away beneath it. You can then walk out either onto the observation deck, which gives you a great view of downtown Fort Worth, or take a ramp down, which will put you down at the sidewalk. Here's what the structure would look like if you were standing in Sycamore Park and looking back towards the high school. The walls of the structure are semi-opaque and would be covered with murals depicting the history of Poly Heights. The walls could also be used as a projection screen for neighborhood movie nights or to watch sports games. And as you walk along through the structure, you would be surrounded by the story of Poly Heights. The trail map for the historic trail would direct you on how to continue your journey into the past. My proposal would allow for the people of Poly Heights to step into the history of their neighborhood. It functions as public art, a monumental entrance, and as an educational tool. Now my teammate Eva will present her solution to the safety of students on Beach Street.
Thank you, Elena. My name is Eva Galvan, and I'm also part of the education group with Elena. There is a safety issue for people crossing Beach Street, which is a street that is 1,800 feet long with 4 lanes behind Polytechnic High School with Sycamore Park across from it. My project scope is addressing the safety issue of crossing with a pedestrian bridge, making Sycamore Park the backyard of the high school. This bridge will address some of the challenges of Polytechnic Heights as a whole that the landscape architect students previously discussed in their master plan. This bridge can help with access to public gathering spaces and activities, be a new park amenity, a space for children of multiple age groups to play in, and can be considered a part of community identity. Because the bridge will be located near the intersection of Beach Street and Rosedale being a main street and entryway to the town, people entering the town this way would see the bridge and recognize it as a marker of Poly, similar to the way people look at the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge in Dallas. Here is the placement of the bridge, having an entryway off of Rosedale's sidewalk and another entryway behind Poly High School. Once in the bridge, walking towards the park, people would walk through a canopy of trees while circumambulating the small water park. People would enter the park on an extended landing to choose which direction they want to go, whether it's to the water park, playground, or basketball court. As already seen, the bridge will have 3 entryways total, 2 on the high school side and 1 on the park side. It will have a mesh cladding for safety and 2 viewing boxes with tables for people to enjoy a view of the town from a high place. And here I provided a couple of perspective views. This one showing the entryway behind the high school looking towards the park. And this one showing a view walking past a viewing box towards the park as well. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Do we have any questions for?
I think we have Catherine still. Right?
Oh, okay. Then sorry.
I think Catherine
Is the last one, right?
Hi, yes, I'm the last one. Closing
Sorry,
up.
Catherine. Go
No,
ahead.
you're good. You're good. Alrighty. As mentioned earlier, I am part of Destination Education. My name is Catherine Van Den. I'm an architecture student in Studio 2 for the grad program. So as we started our research, my group focused on the relationship of Texas Wesleyan University and the north part of the community. So if we look on this left-hand side, we see the expansion plan that Texas Wesleyan hopes to accomplish. And on the right side, we see their expansion border overlaid with what is actually there currently. And so by looking at this, we can see the potential displacement that's at risk for the community here. And just to kind of put this into perspective, as Texas Wesleyan is still growing, they've already started purchasing a number of properties in this area. All the orange outline ones are the ones that they already currently own. And then something else we also noticed in our research is the broken grid system that's on the north side of Polytechnic Heights. This thin blue line here, this is Rosedale, which we've been talking, just to kind of give you a frame of reference, and we're looking to this north side here. So all these red lines indicate the streets that you can no longer pass through. And what's really key to notice is that these are the 3 educational institutes. This is the high school, the middle school, and Texas Wesleyan. And those are the things that are actually breaking the street grid system, making it very hard to move around the north side of the neighborhood. In addition to this, we also have the Fort Worth Police Department that has claimed a section of the streets and turned it into a private parking lot for themselves. In addition, as we look through this part of the neighborhood, we see a lot of defensive architecture around. There's a lot of fences, and sometimes they're fences to nowhere. They don't even enclose the entire property. And we see barricades from various institutes in the area, the schools, and from the Fort Worth Police Department. But we see this defensive architecture continue into the residential part as well. It is very common. It's almost abnormal if you don't have a fence surrounding your property in the residential area. So we see that continue, and it became something that we noted as we studied the community. Now, as mentioned, the landscape architecture students have highlighted Avenue D, what we've named Destination Education, as a place for potential street redesign, which would really help hopefully open up the community and also create a main thoroughfare to pass through the north side of the neighborhood, making it easier to get around. And this second part, the second half of Destination Education, is an architectural intervention that I'll be getting into in a moment. But just to kind of give you a better idea of the area, once again, we have the high school here, the Fort Worth Police Station right here on the corner, William James Middle School, and of course, Texas Wesleyan here on the east side. And this yellow bar is Avenue D. It's about 1,900 feet, so about a third of a mile. And it spans, and it's really interesting. It's such an interesting site because it physically touches each one of these educational institutes and is a great opportunity for something. And so my project was specifically thinking of an architectural intervention to physically connect these 3 educational institutes. And so it started with just a module, a single 10 by 10 cube that has been shaved and cut into a certain way. And ideally, it would be rotated and stacked along to create one unified architectural piece. And this would potentially span the entire length of Destination Education, and create a very interesting partly shaded walkway for students coming to or from, excuse me, and for the community to pass through as well. And additionally, with these large panels that I've still included into the design, there would be the opportunity for a lot of local art, which is very important to the community, to be placed or be tagged or graffitied or added to really be a centerpiece for the community. It's also been discussed of having something that we're calling education stations, where posters themed around a particular subject unit, solar system, you know, famous books, so on and so forth. These educational posters could be hung and be used to engage and interact with the community on the inside of this walkway. And as mentioned earlier, there was talk of having pop-up Wi-Fi stations. And so I've actually designed the module in such a way that it could be used as a place to sit, a place to work, and hopefully be able to be connected to internet, internet and into electricity. So you could charge your laptop, charge your phone as you sit and work and really enjoy the outdoors and really enjoy the community. So overall, this project would hopefully deter from any harmful expansion from Texas Wesleyan. In addition, making it easier to travel the east and west direction to the north side of the neighborhood, and really has the potential to engage with the community and students. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
Okay, and now if there are any quick questions or comments, if not, we'll pass it back on to the landscape architecture students to wrap it up. Josiah or Melissa?
I think we're looking for the last slide.
This one.
Yes.
So just to close out, we would like to thank everybody for being here today. We're so grateful for your time, and we really look forward to your comments. And we'd also like to thank the many groups of people who came together to make this project possible. We really enjoyed working with all the architecture students, dentistry students, and we could not have done it without the willingness of community members to be open-minded and honest. So we'd like to give a special thanks to Texas Wesleyan University, William James Middle School, Polytechnic High School, United Fort Worth Justice Center, Black Coffee, Polytechnic Heights Police Station, and Community Design Fort Worth. And also want to give a special shout out to Dr. M and Professor Chiesa for your guidance and support throughout this whole process. We're grateful for all that you do. So in summary, just to briefly remind you, our master plan that we designed with the community's master plan consists of 4 major networks: street improvements, community nodes, enhanced identity, and infill development. And that concludes our presentation. And thank you so much again for your time and attention, and we look forward to all of your feedback.
So since we have such a variety of reviewers, so we really look forward to having great conversation. And I don't know if, Dr. Martinez Castillo, she worked on the project, so we also would love to hear what she has to say about the projects as well. So. Let's begin the conversation.
And also, just quickly, want to acknowledge that our dean, Dr. Maria Martinez Cosio, is here as well. So Maria, feel free to also comment. And Maria has worked in this neighborhood before, so she knows this very well.
I just want to commend the students. I think you guys did a phenomenal job of capturing a very complex environment. You know, as Dennis mentioned, I think this community has had a number of researchers and nonprofits and folks, you know, working with this community. I'm curious, as you know, across the highway is the Texas Children's Home, you know, which is a huge property. And when that closed, there were questions about, could we integrate the development that was scheduled for that property with Poly to try to drive, right, redevelopment from that location all the way to Texas Women's University. And unfortunately, that didn't happen for a number of reasons, but I'm wondering if the residents or others that you spoke to, did they raise that issue at all, or do they really see Poly bounded more, from, I guess what it was it, the east side of 287 and not really considering the other side of the highway? Nobody brought it up?
That wasn't something that I heard anything about. I think like since Sycamore Park kind of creates a boundary there, there is a little bit of physical separation. So that wasn't something that I heard anybody mention. But that is really interesting to think about how there could be more connection across the park.
Is this a good time for me to ask a question? Again, these vary a lot format-wise. I want to be sure I'm not stepping out of place. Let's begin by saying this is a terrific piece of work, right? Sort of in the moments between the presentation of the neighborhood and then the plan, there were so many times where I thought, oh, they should do this. Oh, they're doing this. Have they considered this? Yes, they are. There's a number of times where that happened, and that's very satisfying. We can sort of see them thinking through the project. I thought it was interesting. There were a few times when you seemed to be introducing what looked to me like pieces of Mexican urbanism, but not exactly by the name, but more by the function. And I thought that one way to do that is to make that a little bit more explicit. So sort of coming back to let's see, that sort of parallel trapezoid south of Avenue D across the middle school, one thing you could do with that is actually create a central place that includes a number of those architectural gestures. So I think this is both a distinctly Mexican space, but it's one that's so similar to vernacular US South and other spaces that everybody in the neighborhood is going to sort of recognize this is, oh yeah, I kind of get it. And that is to create a plaza, right? So in a neighborhood that Latino in large part, I'm almost certain Mexican American, to create that kind of explicit central space is a good idea. Now, exactly how you do that and in what form is the question, since you obviously can't build, a church and a town hall on either side of it. But functionally, you can do something like what happened in Pike Park in Dallas when a lot of Mexicanos moved into the area, that they sort of gradually petitioned the planning folks there. And what they did was they built a kiosco, right? So it's a plaza. A kiosco is more or less a bandstand, but obviously in Spanish. And that is, I thought of the relationship to the amphitheater. That's sort of a smaller, easier to use for smaller functions kind of a space. So those are two things. And the other landscape element that I thought was all over these really, really terrific plans was portales, right? P-O-R-T-A-L-E-S. Those are the essentially roofs overhanging the sidewalks on an actual Mexican or Latin American plaza. And you had all kinds of shade features precisely because, yeah, it gets very hot there in the summer. There's an old saying in Spanish, el hombre sabio busca la sombra, right? The wise man seeks the shade. And this was an enactment of that. So I thought some of the sort of shade areas you could combine either with market stalls in the sort of proposed market spaces. You could also back those up, or you could also build those out depending on how you decide on the facing from some of the commercial infill or commercial conversions, just because that is really a factor. So that was the main thing I saw. But again, otherwise, fantastic work. Really, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Those are some really good suggestions. to use in another iteration.
All right, if nobody else is going to jump in, this is really good stuff. So I'm hoping the other reviewers will jump in. I'm curious, Andrew, in terms of your perspective, right? Poly, I think like many neighborhoods here, it has been going through this transition, right? And it was largely, you know, when they talked about the 1800s, you know, sort of middle class professional community residents. Then it really shifted to a predominantly African-American community. And now over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, it's really become much more Latino. But in terms of designing spaces and reflecting kind of the culture and history of a neighborhood, which one do you choose? And I really like the historical piece that you guys included in your project, right? Sort of recognizing that this neighborhood has gone through all of these changes. But in terms of design, you know, we talk about portales and kioscos, et cetera. How do you balance that? Because my guess is that some residents will push back and say, well, that's not really what I want in my neighborhood. I want whatever, X, Y, or Z. So how do you suggest designers sort of manage that, I don't know if it's tension or is it just transition, you know, if it's just part of the transition that neighborhoods go through? Any suggestions?
I mean, you can begin by, you don't need to call them that, right? Unfortunately, the second you start speaking Spanish, that triggers a defensive reaction among some people, which is why you could just call it a bandstand. And again, that's how it works, right? There are lots of aspects of the plaza that are, you know, not Spanish, but indigenous. There are lots of aspects of the plaza that are reflected in the southern courthouse square. That kind of central place is pretty widely distributed. So the nomenclature does not have to be, you know, the Spanish language. As far as sort of another aspect that was really terrific but not identified in some of the plans for the newer housing was using the space out front, or other, it's having space out front, especially fenced and delimited. As you'll see from my talk this afternoon, there's a Spanish vernacular for that. It's called la yarda, right? It's the front yard with a fence around it. This is not sort of my observation. This is Daniel Arreola back in the late 80s who identified this. And again, it is a specifically Mexican-American adaptation, but you don't have to, it doesn't all have to be wrought iron and tile roofs or anything. You know, that's purely ornamentation, but those kinds of spaces are really good for multi-generational families who want their kids to play out in the front yard, not so that they spill out onto the street, right? But it's sort of a question of safety and security and familiarity. So the street becomes a place of socializing when the kids can be in that front yarda, and, you know, abuela or abuelo is looking after them, and then people just sort of wander by and, you know, and visit. So to have those highly sort of repurposable front yards with fences out front, and again, if you build the fences into them, that can be a good idea, because otherwise they'll just throw up the cheapest available fence, because these are low-income people, and that's not the as usually seen, not super pleasing chain link fences. And again, that creates an intermediate space between the street and the house that people really like. So again, you don't have to call it la yarda. And let me also say in closing, I don't want to imply that it is only Mexican Americans or only Latinos that have these kinds of public features. There's a very active African American public culture, in the same way that there was an early 20th century, you know, European immigrant public culture of hanging out on the stoop and going like, hey, you get away from those kids. So I think you can make that a broadly generalizable public culture.
I think that yelling at your kids is just kind of universal, right?
But again, having those spaces that are permeable, right? So that you know, the big concern among theorists of the public over the past 40 or 50 years has been that lots of white Anglo people who are in the middle class specifically are abandoning the street and having their backyard barbecues, the backyard swimming pools, the home theaters, rather than being out in public. And that's a very real concern. that's not what's happening with the nation's fastest growing populations. And that's a good thing that we can leverage for better urbanism.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great comment. You definitely see the front yard fences already beginning to pop up throughout the neighborhood. I think that, typically in the South, and I'm from the deep South, but here we have a long history of front porches and front porch culture, which a lot of times in the African American community is a big part of their neighborhoods. In addition to that, as we've seen a larger Hispanic population move into the areas, we're starting to see those front yard fences pop up. So I think that having any type of that kind of semi-public private space, either your front yard or your front porch, is really important to the neighborhood and to maintaining the cultures that already exist. I think that was a really great comment. And one actually I was going to make, so you got to it first.
And Matt, you try to speak.
Yeah, I thought this was a fantastic presentation. I've had the privilege of watching this project evolve throughout the semester. And every time I see it, the amount of work that's happened between the last review and the current review has been fantastic. So a couple things. I appreciate the street section showing a hierarchy of street sections and that every street does not have to be a complete street. And I think that helps organize a neighborhood. The spaces you're choosing, I would look when you kind of move more towards kind of the placemaking and the site-specific areas. Think about these spaces as being adaptable. There could have a specific focus on maybe creativity or playgrounds or sports fields, but generally these spaces need to be adaptable and have a layered program on them. They could be of different kind of gradients, from activity to more creative, if you'd like. I really like the idea of the urban garden being more than just food plants and being landscape plants. I think that's an excellent opportunity to kind of begin to use native plants that are easily propagated, and for kind of landscape to be more accessible than just the upper classes. Landscape is very expensive on a single family home for lower and middle class households. So this is an opportunity. You can almost think of it as a little free nursery instead of a little free library to spread this character across a neighborhood. And so when you're thinking about this more, you might actually want to look at that plant palette a little bit closer. What could potentially be used for rain gardens and bioswales and the green infrastructure that is easily accessible with native plants, and what could be used for potentially a more ornamental or kind of that pollinator garden that could also bring that back into our urban spaces. And all you really need for a pollinator garden is like 6 square feet, and then butterflies and bees and birds will come. I mean, there's studies showing that it's not necessarily the plant, it's the native space and surface area for those pollinators to use. So I really like that. I also think it's an opportunity to, the landscape architecture profession as a whole is trying to be trying to be more diverse. How do we bring more diversity into the profession? Bringing this into neighborhoods basically opens up an opportunity for people to kind of see, what's out there as a career. I would not be a landscape architect if not for my local nursery that I worked in high school, middle school, and college, that they don't exist as much anymore. And so this is, I think, a great opportunity to kind of go beyond the borders of this neighborhood, and potentially work with the younger generation. Besides that, I think everything is fantastic. I would challenge you to kind of look at public art. Has been brought up a lot. If the art didn't happen, is the space still successful? And so think about, because a lot of public art, the most successful public art and murals are organic in my mind. And so kind of create spaces that this could occur, which I think you're doing, but also if the art did not occur, or if it occurs long in the future, is this successful without that? And then also a couple of small things. when you think about safety and crossing the streets with kind of overhead structures, think about how people are still going to be crossing at grade. So try to integrate how that might work, because a lot of people aren't going to go up and over. They're just going to still cross, but probably cross right there. So integrate that into your design to give options so that so safety is still a priority. And then that's basically my comments, but fantastic job. And I look forward to seeing this progress even through the rest of the semester.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, Brett, I saw, as soon as I call out Matthew's name, I saw you on mute, so sorry for that.
No, I was going to say, I really appreciated a couple of things in general. One was that I think to begin with, that each cohort of student pushes from an area of familiarity into an area of exploration, right? Landscape into a kind of master planning exercise and social engagement, community engagement, and scalar exploration for the second year architecture students. And I want to applaud that, because I think that that's fundamentally the opportunity that the college presents, given the diversity of programs that are contained at CAPPA. And so I just want to celebrate that for the students and for the faculty, and ultimately what the symposium's about. I think that's a real win. I also want to say that I think that you move from strategies to kind of tactics in a really kind of nice, fluid way. And I think AK mentioned that. And I think that every time I saw you kind of, what I thought would be suspended in one place, you kind of get down into some stuff that I thought was really nice in terms of how you start to think about it at a more granular scale, or kind of moving between scales in a pretty nice way. I want to draw upon a reference that for me was really personal. Living in New Orleans for about 5 years, the street itself, like literally the street, was appropriated for both a place of refuge and celebration, right? So you could move up and down the street for a kind of celebratory event where the community came out off of your front porch, through your front yard, and you were in a parade or you're in a second line. And that was drawing the community into something where it gathered and it understood its neighbors in a kind of different way. And it moved through the community in a manner that understood its territory in a different way. And I think that the public art is important, and drawing these literal lines through kind of almost infrastructure or artifact is engagement. But there's nothing quite like walking through your neighborhood with your neighbors and engaging that. And maybe we've all done a little bit of that through the pandemic in ways that we haven't before, like walked around and engaged with our neighbors in a manner. But I also say that the neutral ground was a place of refuge, right? We got up onto the middle area and parked our cars or had barbecues, right, in a way that allowed us to kind of find this interstitial space. And I love the formal ways that you've done this, but I think that there's a lot of informal ways that you can kind of begin to allow for the appropriation in the engagement, right? Certainly the front porch to the front yard is that, but the neutral ground certainly became that. And there's a lot of lessons that I think that we can take from other areas. So I love the way that AK kind of sets that up for us through the bandstand or the plaza, right? But I love that there's other probably ways that we can think about that as lines of the street itself, for instance, in New Orleans.
Yeah, so as a fellow New Orleanian originally, I can appreciate all those comments. And I think that what kind of ties the comments that AK was making and that Brad is making is that New Orleans has a very large Spanish history. Most of the people don't realize that the city is actually probably more so Spanish and less French in terms of architecture and design. And so I think that that's why you begin to see those things tie together. I wanted to go back to a few comments that Matt had made, because they were they were some of the things that I picked up on as well. I also really liked the cross sections for the streets. I thought they were good. I found them incredibly idealistic. And that's one of the reasons that I asked a little bit about the master thoroughfare plan and the cross sections that we have in those. And this may be a little weedy into the weeds, but you know, in the city of Fort Worth, I'm not going to be able to get a 10-foot wide lane. The most I'm going to get, the smallest I'm going to get is 11. You know, the smallest street that we have is 29 feet in pavement. So beginning to really look at those technical details and kind of work within the confines and the constraints of those, I think would really help refine the proposal in general. And then I wanted to echo his comments about, you know, the at-grade crossings. I think that those are so important, that we really want people to be at those at-grade crossings, be on the street. We don't want to take them off of the street, because, I mean, eyes on the street are so important to creating a safe atmosphere. So I would look at how you, again, I would echo his comments on how you enhance that at-grade crossing if you're going to be going above it with a pedestrian bridge or any other type of crossing. So those were just my comments, really just echoing what all the other reviewers have said, to be honest.
I can chime in with one thing just super quick to bring us back to history again. But this neighborhood has a really contested history. I think it's already been brought up, but I do want to just remind that it's a white neighborhood, and then a Black neighborhood, and then a Latino neighborhood. And those narratives of what the neighborhood is, people hold on to them very tightly. And since I'm engaged with the historic preservation community in Fort Worth, which I often do not agree with at all, their idea of what poly is kind of different than the people who live there now. And so you have an opportunity through a kind of project like this to try to negotiate some of that. And so I think when you use the word history, it's not a concrete word. I mean, it's something that means something really different depending on who you're talking to. And I think the main thing that I would say that's very concrete to your proposal, which was fantastic in its attempt to address how incredibly difficult this neighborhood is and how wonderful it is at the same time. Your history trail focused on landmark buildings. Those landmark buildings are going to represent a certain kind of vision of what the history of that neighborhood is about. And I would really strongly encourage you, when you think about that trail that stops at landmarks, to try to add some other stuff in. That isn't just maybe the stuff that's like on the landmark list from the city or on the historic structures survey report, but places that people identify for you. So I would include Black coffee in your landmark trail, even if it's not like a 1928 Beaux-Arts school. I like to separate the contemporary neighborhood from the historical landmarks of the neighborhood. I think introduces problems and divisions in that historical narrative, and really the opportunities to put them together. I think you're picking up on all of that, and it's really, really hard. And I keep working on it, because I think you can find some really interesting things to do in bringing those narratives together.
Yeah, to echo what Catherine or Kate is saying, is that the chamber has a program called Heritage Trails, and it's mostly just in downtown Fort Worth, but it does a good job of telling those stories that are not just about historic landmark buildings, but are also about cultural events. And so it may be something that you just take as a reference as well. And then the overall sign package that was kind of the entrance point sign package, they seemed a little out of context and out of place for the neighborhood. So I would look at restudying those in the scale and how they fit into the existing fabric that's already in the neighborhood.
I think that's a good place to end. Thank you, everyone. And Juan, I'll let you wrap us up.
Well, what a great conversation. Thank you so much. We will consider all the great comments to our projects as we move forward. Thank you for taking the time to join our presentation. We really appreciate it.